Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're looking at a really unique moment in American political history, William Henry Harrison's 1840 Log Cabin Campaign.
That's right. It's fascinating because the campaign itself was so memorable, so huge.
Totally. It got him elected, but then
Yeah.
his presidency was just 31 days long.
Just vanish. Such a stark contrast.
Right. It makes you wonder, how did this campaign, which was so heavy on, symbolism, capture everyone's imagination like that?
And what does it really tell us about maybe enduring American values?
Yeah.
Or just how political messaging works?
Exactly. That's what we want to dig into today. We've got some great sources stuff about the campaign itself and also Harrison's biography. So our mission really is to unpack the cultural impact and the lessons we can still take from this very specific political moment.
Sounds good. Where should we start?
Okay, let's jump in. One source calls the 1840 election a cultural spectacle. That sounds about right. What made it such a big deal?
Well, you had a few things going on. First, the economy wasn't great. There was a downturn.
People were feeling it. Always shakes things up.
Definitely. And then you had the guy in charge, President Martin Van Buren. The perception, rightly or wrongly, was that he was kind of detached.
Yeah.
Aristocratic even.
Okay, so ripe for a challenge.
Exactly. And the Whig Party saw their chance. They generally wanted a more active government, appealed to a wider group than the Democrats back then.
And their strategy for Harrison, it was pretty simple, wasn't it? Almost surprisingly so.
Very direct. They basically decided to sell Harrison as this simple, relatable guy, a man of the people.
The whole log cabin and hard cider thing?
That was the core of it. They built this image. Harrison living simply in a log cabin, enjoying his hard cider, just like an ordinary American.
Except, and this is the kicker, that wasn't really the full picture, was it?
Not even close. Harrison actually came from a pretty wealthy Virginia family, landowners, politically connected.
Wow. So the image was carefully constructed.
Very carefully. It shows how deliberately they were crafting a public persona. Despite his privileged roots, they made him look like a frontiersman, sort of like Andrew Jackson before him.
It's that associative framing you mentioned, linking him to popular ideas through these simple symbols.
Precisely. And people saw those symbols everywhere.
Oh, yeah. The sources mentioned banners, posters, even merchandise like campaign swag back in 1840.
Absolutely. Mugs, plates, handkerchiefs, all with log cabins on them. It was incredibly pervasive. They really understood visual power.
What do you think made those specific visuals, the cabin, the cider, stick so well?
Well, the log cabin probably tapped into this nostalgia, maybe. A longing for simpler times, self-sufficiency, especially when the economy felt shaky.
Makes sense. A contrast to uncertainty.
And hard cider.
Yeah.
Maybe it felt more American, more local, compared to, say, imported wines associated with the elites Van Buren was painted as.
And the songs. We can't forget the songs.
Oh, the songs were huge. Catchy tunes, constantly reinforcing that log cabin story.
It feels like they were aiming for a feeling more than a policy debate.
I think that's a big part of it. This election marked a real shift, towards image, symbolism, making that emotional connection, maybe sometimes over the policy details.
And they really leaned into the contrast with Van Buren.
Definitely. He was the foil, the out-of-touch elitist, living it up in the White House while folks were struggling.
That gold spoon oration sounds brutal, just hammering his lifestyle.
It was. And even little things like that wort-wort chant people apparently yelled.
What was that?
It was meant to mimic the sound of Van Buren supposedly sipping champagne, contrasting with Harrison's, down-to-earth cider, really playing up the class difference, real or imagined.
So this campaign feels like a major moment for understanding how popular appeal and just building a relatable persona became so central to American politics.
He really did set a template, didn't it? Which brings us right back to the power of those symbols. The log cabin campaign is just such a textbook example.
Yeah. The log cabin itself, it's like shorthand for authenticity, right?
Yeah.
A simplicity being rounded one of the common folk.
Exactly. And the hard cider, it's not just a drink. It's representing a whole lifestyle.
Yeah.
Relatable, down to earth, not fancy or foreign.
It's fascinating. And for you listening, when you see symbols used in campaigns today, understanding this history helps you sort of see the playbook.
And this was all happening when the U.S. was still figuring itself out, wanting to be distinct from Europe, from aristocracy. This whole egalitarian idea was powerful.
Yeah, the ideal of equality, even if, as the sources hint, the reality on the ground was a bit more complicated.
For sure. The aspiration was key there.
And the campaign just plugged right into that. This desire for a leader who seemed like he got it, like he shared the same struggles, the same values.
Someone who felt authentic.
Which raises that question again for you. Why did these symbols hit so hard back then? And what does it say about what Americans then and now want to see in their leaders? That desire for authenticity seems perennial.
It really does. It feels like this campaign was an early, maybe even pivotal moment in weaponizing that idea of authenticity.
Okay, so amazing campaign, huge impact. But then, the presidency itself, tragically short.
Yeah, Harrison gets ill, possibly pneumonia, right after the inauguration.
Yeah.
Dies just a month in.
Such a shock. So policy-wise, not much of a legacy there, obviously.
Almost none. But the campaign. That's where the lasting insights are.
Yeah.
It tells us so much about American political culture.
It really showed how powerful a good story, a compelling narrative could be.
And leveraging those symbols effectively, even if the story wasn't, let's say, 100% accurate.
You can draw a straight line from that to modern political ads, can't you? All the imagery, the emotional hooks.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And think about how they handled attacks. One source mentions the Democrats calling Harrison Granny Harrison, trying to make him seem old and feeble.
How'd the Whigs handle that?
They just leaned harder into the log cabin and hard cider thing. Basically owned the symbol man image, turning the attack on its head. Smart politics.
And that slogan, Tippecanoe and Tyler too. Catchy, memorable even today.
It really stuck. And it highlights the candidate's military past. Tippecanoe was a battle Harrison won. Adds to the hero narrative.
There's that quote from the pro-Van Buren paper after they lost. Something like,
We have been sung down, lied down, and drunk down. Yeah.
that just perfectly sums up this new kind of politics, doesn't it? All about the spectacle, the narrative.
It does. And again, the irony, knowing Harrison's actual background, wealthy family, owned enslaved people, a world away from the log cabin image.
Very much like Andrew Jackson, who also wasn't exactly a poor farmer, but was sold that way.
The contrast was the key tactic. Harrison, the simple frontiersman, versus Van Buren with his supposed gold spoons and fancy living.
That wort chant again. It's amazing how specific those attacks were.
All feeding this image. It really underscores how the focus on persona, on being relatable, sometimes more than the actual policies, became embedded in American politics really early on.
You could argue the Harrison campaign was basically an early masterclass in political branding.
I think that's fair. Creating that emotional connection with voters was paramount.
So for you listening, the big takeaway from the log cabin campaign might be just that. A reminder to always look closely at the symbols and stories being presented.
Yeah, it's easy to get swept up in the imagery, the feeling.
But it's crucial, right, to dig a bit deeper. What are the actual plans? What's the substance behind the symbol?
Absolutely. An informed public needs both to understand the emotional appeal and the policy realities.
So ultimately, what this deep dive shows is that the echoes of William Henry Harrison's very short presidency, or rather his campaign, are still with us. That focus on image, narrative, making that gut connection with voters.
It all feels very familiar. The tools might be different in social media instead of just posters and songs. But the core strategies pioneered back then, they're still very much in play.
Which leads us to a final thought for you to chew on. What parts of that 1840 symbolism, that log cabin appeal, still resonate today?
Yeah, what images or narratives about authenticity and being one of the people grab your attention in today's politics? Something to think about.
Definitely worth reflecting on that balance or imbalance between image and substance as you navigate the political world around you.